Hello and welcome to The Defender, Wisconsin's environmental podcast. I'm Amy Barrilleaux. The Defender is powered by Clean Wisconsin, your environmental voice since 1970. The Energy Department is unleashing beautiful, clean coal. That's a direct quote from the U.S. Department of Energy, but for something so beautiful and so clean, there sure is a long list of pretty scary toxins that come along with it. I'm just going to list a few of the chemicals and heavy metals that are discharged into our air and our water from coal-burning power plants. Lead, mercury, arsenic, cyanide, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, cadmium, benzene, cobalt, chromium, chloride, methane, selenium, nickel. I could go on, but you get the picture. When it comes to energy, there's nothing quite as devastating as coal. Now, as part of a nationwide push to keep coal burning in America, the Trump administration is directing $425 million in taxpayer money to Alliant Energy here in Wisconsin to extend the life of its aging coal plant in Columbia County. Alliant Energy had pledged to shut down the plant in 2024, but never got around to it. Now it's set to keep burning until at least 2029. And while federal money props up old coal power plants in Wisconsin and beyond, the EPA is busy relaxing rules meant to keep some of that toxic pollution out of our air and water. In this episode, what our nation's new commitment to old coal means for Wisconsin's water and for the regulations that are supposed to protect us. That's right now on The Defender. The EPA says it wants to toss out a rule that keeps coal power plants from releasing hundreds of millions of gallons of toxic metals into nearby waterways. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin said the rule is so hard to comply with that it could cause coal plants to shut down, and that would deprive AI data centers of the electricity they need. Zeldin called the rule burdensome in the face of the coming, quote, AI data center revolution. The move is especially concerning here in Wisconsin, where we still get a third of our electricity from importing and burning coal. Joining me is friend of the show, Clean Wisconsin attorney Evan Feinauer. And I hope you feel, honored, because friend of the show is a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear you say it. First of all, it's great to be here, but I was surprised to hear you say it because I work down the hall from you. So
yeah, that's true, like 50 feet away. But it is really convenient to have you down the hall when an issue like this comes up, because you really are an expert on the Clean Water Act and the contamination caused by coal. And I think when people think about burning coal, they might think about climate change or soot or air pollution, but maybe not so much about what happens to our water. So how does pollution get into our waterways because of coal power plants?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And there's nothing wrong, obviously, with thinking about burning coal as a problem in terms of climate change and air pollution, because it absolutely is a problem for those reasons. It just happens to also be a problem for our waters. And the reason is that the nasty stuff that comes out of coal when you burn it, when coal is combusted, also finds its way into waterways, sometimes through the air. So a lot of the mercury that we have in our environment comes from burning coal. As a matter of fact, in North America, burning coal for electricity is the number one source of mercury in our waterways. So basically, if you think about it, you burn coal, it comes out the top of the smokestack, it goes up in the air, and at some point, some of that stuff's going to fall down and deposit onto the earth. So that's why you can go out in wetlands in northern Wisconsin and test and find mercury, because that's all from coal combustion, or at least a lot of it. Another major source is small-scale gold mining, which is a bigger problem in the developing world. But here in Wisconsin, if you're finding a bunch of mercury out in the environment, a lot of that's from coal. So that's not just rivers and lakes, but that's wetlands, and that bioaccumulates. It messes up our wildlife. So it's a major problem, and it's something I don't think people think about when they think about coal. But that's not it, because when they burn coal, they're not just creating air pollution. They also have this gunky solid stuff, the coal combustion residuals is what they're called, or CCR sometimes. And they got to do something with it. And they have to flush out their equipment. They got to clean stuff. They got to move it out to make room to burn more coal. And that results in either direct discharges of water pollution into rivers, lakes, streams, or they put it into these settling ponds or ash ponds, some of which are lined, some of which are not. And so that creates significant problems for groundwater contamination, which is also a problem for surface water because groundwater and surface water are hydrologically linked. And then even beyond that, at the end of the day, even if they're not putting it into a pond or treating it and dumping it into a river or lake, there's these solids that are left over, which are then landfilled effectively, and they're kind of just there for a very, very, very long time in terms of the human lifespan, basically forever. And so anytime it rains or if the groundwater table gets high and it intersects with where the solids are being stored, then you have what's called leachate, which is basically the nasty stuff that's still in the solids then becomes waterborne and it moves into our groundwater. So it's this kind of just problem that moves around. It can be in the air, it can be in liquid form, it can be a solid, which then can become liquid again. And so no matter what, burning coal creates this toxic substance that's just there and has to be managed in some way or another. And what we're talking about here is stuff like mercury, arsenic, selenium, nitrates, boron, lead, cadmium, chromium, these heavy metals that are toxic in certain quantities. It depends on what kind of coal you're burning, what kind of concentration of these you're going to have. But this is nasty stuff, and having it in our waters is absolutely a bad thing.
Now, the reason why we're talking about this right now, instead of saying, hey, the last coal plant in Wisconsin has finally shut down, as we thought we'd be saying maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we're talking about the Trump administration embracing coal once again and sending some money potentially to Wisconsin to Alliant Energy to keep an old 50-year-old coal plant burning coal and polluting our environment. What are the kinds of things that we are seeing from the Trump administration, not just this money to help pay for an old coal plant to stay open, but also kind of a series of real nice things for the coal industry? I guess rollbacks of safeguards is what's been happening kind of it feels like every month we are hearing about a different rollback. So what's happening on that front?
Yeah, so you mentioned the money, the taxpayer money that's being used to subsidize these old, expensive to run and dirty facilities. There's another, I think, kind of more problematic subsidy that's happening, which is that basically our health is being leveraged against the continued operation of these facilities. And that's because the way the Clean Water Act is supposed to work, so I just outlined all the different ways that these plants create water pollution. The way the Clean Water Act is supposed to work is that you have these technology-based standards. So what they do is, what kind of technologies do we have available to clean this up so the discharges aren't so bad, there's not as much pollution being put into the environment. And then we're going to make you follow those standards. And you'll get a permit, and there'll be a permit drafter who says, okay, well, these are the standards. So this is how much of selenium you can discharge in your permit, which then lasts 5 years. Then you got to come back and renew it every 5 years. And it's supposed to be technology forcing, and it's supposed to make these facilities clean their acts up over time and get better and better. Even though we're talking about, obviously, like an industrial revolution aged technology burning coal for electricity. But what's instead happened most recently with the Trump administration and the EPA in the last couple of years here has been that basically every single one of those technology-based standards to push the industry to do better in terms of polluting less has either been weakened and rolled back, or the timeline for compliance with the standards have been pushed so far out as to be kind of meaningless, like into the 2030s. And what's really interesting about it is that, we've had, this happens with a lot of areas of environmental law. We have this kind of ping-ponging back and forth when we have presidential elections and the administrations have different priorities and you get one rule and another. But this is really kind of like an across the board. If there's a standard, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, even regulations of solids under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act or RCRA, this administration is rolling them back or pushing the deadlines out really across the board, which is remarkable. And what that's going to mean is that these facilities just have to do less in their existing permits and in their next permits if this is the way that the law stays here. And Fortunately, a lot of these rules have been challenged. The ones that are about to be promulgated are almost certainly going to be challenged. How many of those challenges will be successful, I don't know. But the administration is clearly bending over backwards to make sure that coal plants don't have to pay a cent to clean up their pollution.
And Clean Wisconsin is actually involved in a lawsuit over one of those rollbacks, which is, weakening the mercury rule, which mercury is a neurotoxin. So I think we should all be pretty concerned about that. Also, there's the enforcement side, right? So if a coal plant does break a few environmental rules, release a little too much cadmium or lead or mercury, what's happening to stop it?
Yeah, so one of the things that people often forget about is you don't just need strong standards on the books. You need them to show up in permits, and then if somebody's not meeting the terms in their permits, the government actually has to go out and enforce them. Otherwise, this is just a bunch of stuff on paper, right? It's not reality. And the administration very formally just came out and said it's not our priority to enforce these standards that we're trying to roll back. So it's not even like, well, we have good standards in the interim until this rulemaking process wraps up. They're just not enforcing the existing standards because it's their position that those aren't what should be the standards. So it's really kind of a free pass across the board in that regard for coal plants. And you might be wondering why EPA is doing this, and it's interesting because when they do these rulemakings, they know that they're likely going to be sued. And there's a series of legal tests about when an agency can put out a new rule, particularly if it's really kind of doing a 180 on its position. If you think about it in your everyday life, if you just completely change your mind about something, people are going to want to know why. And it's the same with courts and agencies. And there's certain legal standards they have to meet. So they state a series of reasons. And in the most recent rules that I've been looking at, they say we need to basically let these coal plants off the hook for their pollution because there's a quote-unquote energy crisis, which they essentially mean, and they're very explicit about this. This isn't something that you have to read between the lines on, is that we need to build a bunch of data centers for AI, and that means we need electricity, so we want these coal plants to stay open. And if that means your water gets dirtier, then I guess that's just too bad, so sad for you, which I don't think is either how the Clean Water Act is supposed to work, or I think represents a position that is consistent with what Americans want and prioritize in their lives, which is their health and environment that functions.
And even the notion that there is an energy emergency. I mean, the most recent taxpayer money that was ordered to go to coal plants across the country, including here in Wisconsin, came under this sort of emergency defense power, apparently, that President Trump claims to have. But our own grid operator, MISO, in its report says we don't have an energy emergency in Wisconsin or in the entire MISO grid region. We're expected to have a surplus of power in the next 5 years. So even that, we need energy for AI argument is a bit hollow. So it just feels like we're kind of in this twilight zone. I mean, did you ever think, okay, back in, let's say, in those days of 2015, I don't know, to 10, 11 years ago, that we'd be sitting here talking about coal and having more water pollution because of coal?
Not really. And it's interesting, I don't know if you picked 2015 on purpose, but 2015 was when, that was towards the end of the Obama administration, and they put out the 2015 effluent limit guidelines for this sector, for coal-fired power plants. And it was really innovative and for the first time imposed substantive limits on water pollution from coal plants through some of the waste streams we were discussing earlier. And at the time, a lot of people said, this is really trying to put a nail in the coffin of a dead industry, burning coal for electricity. And what it's basically going to do is accelerate retirements, because now that we're going to be making them clean up after themselves, they're going to look at the cost of doing so and say, well, it doesn't make sense because these coal plants are expensive to run. They're not a cheap form of electricity. They're old anyway. And so it'll just make sense to shut down. And I know a lot of us have felt like Lucy with the football with these coal plants because they just keep moving back the retirement deadlines. And they can say whatever they want about AI and data centers. I went back and looked at the 2020 rule from the first Trump administration when they were trying to roll back the 2015 ELGs for coal plants. And you're not going to find the words data center or artificial intelligence anywhere in there because it was the year 2020. That's how fast things have changed. And it was all about, coal mining jobs and all these completely different bases for rolling back the standards. And so it's really just remarkable the extent to which over the last 10 plus years now, there's been this concerted effort to keep alive this ancient technology that's expensive and it's dirty. And, particularly, I always think about this in my job at Clean Wisconsin is like what's good for the world, but also, it's like this think globally, act locally kind of thing. And in Wisconsin, we don't have coal that we mine. There's no coal miners in Wisconsin. We're just sending our money out of the state every day that we're consuming electricity in this way. And we can build solar and wind here in the state. And then our waters, which stay here, it's not like we're taking all of our water pollution and sending it to where they're mining the coal and saying, well, you can have this back in exchange. We were stuck with the pollution and we're paying for electricity that's generated by sending money out the door to another state or another country. And it feels bizarre and it is very surreal to still be talking about this. I mean, the idea that we're going to build new coal power plants, I was just talking with some environmentalists at a different organization yesterday, and they were sort of, just almost in despair about it. It's so ridiculous. For people who understand this area technically and scientifically, it's completely preposterous that we would be thinking about doing this. And the other thing is this pollution is going to be here for a long time. These plants close and they have all this gunky, nasty stuff we were talking about, and it's in these ash ponds or these landfills, and it's just there. And so we could be sitting here in 50 years saying, I can't believe we kept burning coal so long. And by the way, this groundwater is still contaminated. I mean, that should give everybody, not just pause, but should make people furious that this is what's happening.
When you hear about, the Trump administration wants to keep coal plants online and maybe even build new coal plants, it does make you feel like, what am I going to do? I guess it makes you get to that point, that give up point, right? Like, if this is happening, it's happening. I'm overwhelmed. But actually, I think states have a good bit of power here when it comes to state laws that can name the energy priorities, that can require coal plant shutdowns instead of just letting utilities keep, they're actually, we're Charlie Brown and they're Lucy, taking the football away. So I think there actually are things that we can do. Do you look at other states that are shutting down their coal plants and think, why don't we have laws that require our energy utilities to actually shut down things that are hurting us?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just other states too, it's other countries, right, that have burned coal historically, and they've found a way to manage transitioning without much disruption to their economies, or to just having enough electricity. I think when I think about it as somebody who mostly focuses on water, what I think about are, how can our state actors do things to make sure that with the water pollution, even if we're not thrilled with the standards that are on the books, they're showing up in permits because it's our state DNR that writes the permits, even though these are standards that are informed by the federal EPA is doing. We have our own Clean Water Act permitting program here. So we watchdog DNR and make sure the permits that are going out are compliant. There's also stuff that the Clean Water Act doesn't really directly regulate in the same way, like groundwater. And so we've been involved in the past and will be in the future with regards to whether or not these facilities are causing groundwater contamination, because Wisconsin has its own state groundwater law. So we do have tools in the state that are specific to Wisconsin that let us address some of the pollution. But the bigger picture is, in terms of shutting these things down, retiring them in a reasonable, orderly fashion as soon as possible, and then also just not building any more nasty fossil fuel stuff. We absolutely have more ability to do that if we can get enough political will behind it and get people to understand that that's a priority, there's no reason stopping us from doing that. I mean, there's nothing in any of the legal standards we've been talking about that would prevent us as a state from saying, actually, we're not going to build this new coal plant because we're just going to prioritize renewables instead.
I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about that kind of work, energy priorities, integrated resource planning, that kind of thing, so we can stop relying on our energy utilities and our federal government to do the right thing, because that's not how it's playing out. Friend of the show, Evan Feinauer, person around the corner from my office. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain all this. I think it's really important.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to The Defender. We have all kinds of information on our website about the harms of coal and gas on our environment and health, plus some actions you can take right now to fight pollution coming from fossil fuels in Wisconsin. Just check the show notes or log on to cleanwisconsin.org/podcast. I'm Amy Barrilleaux. Talk to you later.